Well, I think we can start, if that's okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for joining me today. My name is Eleanor Ogilvie, and I'm the Engagement Manager for MacLean Cancer Support, and I cover Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I'd just like to introduce you to my colleague Morag, who couldn't be with us today. She'd fully intended, but she's unfortunately had COVID, so she has joined us from sunny Scotland. I hope it's sunny still. Would you like to introduce yourself, Morag?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be online with you. I'm so sorry you can't be there in person. So my name's Morag. I'm an engagement lead with MacLean Cancer Support, and for the last just over 2 years, I've been facilitating and part of the digital storytelling project team at MacLean Cancer Support.
Thanks, Morag. So we're just going to talk to you about today about our project, where we've been working for the past 2 years with people affected by cancer, as you would imagine. It's not academic in any way. We are just practitioners, but certainly a lot of the stuff that Tony was just talking about there certainly resonated with what we've been experiencing when we've been working with people. So we've been going to start with a story. First of all, if that's okay, and we'll probably end with a story, but first of all, we thought in good digital storytelling practice, we would share some of our work from someone whose experience is very close to what we're talking about today in the healing power of stories. So Morag, I'll just hand over to you to
Lovely, Eleanor. Let's hope it all goes all goes swimmingly. So so we want to start with a story, as Eleanor said, and the story that you'll hear starting with is Leslie's story, and it's a deeply personal story about Leslie's cancer experience. And as we always say with any story that we share, if you choose to watch it, please stay with us. But if you choose to step away, it's about 7 minutes in length. And so what we'd like to do is, first of all, share Leslie's story. And then also I would like to share some of Leslie's words about her experience in sharing her story as well. And I think as another participant said to us on the workshops, I think the power of these stories is in the personal detail. It's not just another story about a cancer journey, it's about the person who experienced cancer. So I'll just go ahead and share Leslie's story. And Leslie herself described her story, just as we've got on the slide there. In the deafening silence is my story of growth and reflection on a time when life turned upside down and nothing fit into place like I thought it should. So here's Leslie's story for us.
Usually when the GP asks me if there's anything else, I tend to smile and say, no, that's me. This time I said, well, actually.
It's not showing. No. I've got another. Right, okay. Let me just.
She's going to show, she's showing the video, yeah, so we maybe need to.
Yep.
You should have control. Sorry.
Yeah, it worked. It worked a wee bit earlier on when I tried it, so I'm not sure what's.
You want to give it another go, Morag, because you're highlighting, you're spotlighted, yeah.
Okay.
We could hear it fine, but we just couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Is that coming?
Nope.
No, I've got it stored somewhere else. So what I can do is I can share from somewhere else. Bear with me. Oops.
I'll make you host. Perhaps you'll be able to.
Okay, right now.
You were co-host. But
okay.
I'm not sure it makes a difference.
Right, let's see. As I say, I've got it stored somewhere else if this doesn't work this time.
Okay.
Is that working this time?
No.
No.
Nothing. Right, bear with me. Let me just come out of this and I'll share it from somewhere else. Right. I'm just going to get it up somewhere else. Bear with me.
And I thought I was going to be under pressure.
Oh my goodness, it's a second again.
Sorry.
Right, no, you're fine. Here we go. Right, let's try again this time. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah, perhaps. Are you sharing your screen?
I was sharing my screen, yep.
Because it stopped now. It
Right.
stopped the sharing.
Yeah, I was just getting the story from another.
Now we can see it, yeah.
Okay, here we go. Right, let's just double check. I'm just making sure that the sign's sharing this time. Yep, okay, here we go.
Usually when the GP asks me if there's anything else, I tend to smile and say, no, that's me. This time I said, well, actually. Fast forward through a whirlwind few weeks of exams, scans and biopsies, and here I was, waiting for that call. It didn't come until 4:30, unknown number calling. It was Christmas Eve. I thought this was the part where I was supposed to feel like I was falling or stuck in cement while the world rushed around me, but I didn't. I just felt nothing. If I sat here for long enough, maybe I would have some kind of reaction. Maybe I would soak in some of my mum's logical processing, her determined stance of it's going to be okay, because for her there was just no other choice. But still, nothing. I called my husband. It seemed like a nonchalant phone call for life-altering news. The most intimate person in my life, and it had felt like an awkward conversation. Did I do that right? Is that how you tell someone you have cancer? I mean, I guess. I've never done it before. As the cancer wheel started turning, from breaking the news and on into treatment, I struggled to bear the weight of everyone's sadness. It was a physical presence, a suffocating mist in the air. I couldn't sit in the room with it. I was overwhelmed by the pressure, so I would become whatever version of coping people needed to see in order to force some of their sadness to just retreat away from me. I would find whatever pretense was selling that day and I would commit. I could be the brave face. I could be the life of the party. Surrounded by the deafening silence of nighttime, when I could no longer sustain the energy to hold my performance together, my mind would wander. Sometimes it would land on a photograph of a little girl that sits on my nanny's dresser. It's been there as far back as I can remember. It's her sister who died when they were young. There are no accompanying stories or loving descriptions. She's simply an unknown girl in a picture. My sister became pregnant during my treatment. It broke her heart to tell me. It made me think of that photograph. Is that who I would become? Would my sister's children only ever know me as a stranger in an old photograph? Over time, the anecdotes about me would fade to irrelevance. People would talk about my husband with sadness, about how he'd lost his wife, and send sympathetic glances in his direction. They were only married 2 years, no family. She was so young. It makes me wonder, how many people aren't afraid of the dying part, but are scared of being simply gone? About halfway through treatment, with every approach of a needle, my veins started to collapse in rebellion. We had to coax them to the surface by running my arms under hot water. People would grimace, betraying their own discomfort. Dark bruises adorned my arms, a physical representation of how worn my resolve was becoming. By the end of my last chemo session, there was no ringing the bell. I just got up, walked out. I didn't have the energy then to care about the lack of fanfare. I'd had to find a new job that month, so maintaining the facade of normality was more important than ever. When I ditched my wig a couple of months later, I explained away the drastic transformation as an overwhelming desire for a pixie cut, and I moved on. Soon we had the most wonderful shock of our lives. I was pregnant with our first son. My boys are the ultimate compensation for every moment of fear, of emotional suffocation, for every falling handful of hair, every glance in the mirror to see a swollen grey complexion just staring back. And yet, as the months turned into years, I couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. Why hadn't it felt the way I thought it should? In 2018, I joined the Macmillan Cancer Experience panel, and I found elements of shared experience. A tricky diagnosis here, a dark-humoured comment there, and with that came the safe space I didn't even know I needed to look back over my shoulder to where I hadn't dared to before. When I looked, she was staring right back. She, that version of me. It was hard to give her any room to breathe. How could I make space to carry someone like that? She inspires sadness and strife in loved ones. She makes people so uncomfortable that they choose not to be near you. She throws a pity party and serves your dignity on a platter. She draws a suffocating attention, creating something you didn't want anyone to see, and then forces it out into full view. She had displaced me into an unfamiliar space without the kindness or decency to supply any wisdom or knowledge to navigate the road ahead. She was a problem that couldn't be solved by my usual recourse of research and lists. I heard once that even if a cancer patient survives, they're never free. They will spend the rest of their life waiting, always waiting for it to come back, to have another crack at us. I realise now that she sits in that place. She is the one who sits and waits. I'm so sure in my role right now. I'm mummy, all consumed in this stage of my life. But becoming mummy so quickly after cancer meant I pushed that part of my life away, which was very easy to do because despite showering me with support, everyone just wanted to put a lid on it and forget about it. A miracle pregnancy completely eclipsed the need to process what I had just been through. But in order to heal, I needed to welcome the unwelcome, to accept that unacceptable version of me. For years she stalked menacingly behind me, a casting shadow that only I could see. I had to address how unfair I'd been to myself and create a space for her. That space had to be ripped open and painfully moulded. But she's in there. It's taken a lot of work to move forward. It's required me to retreat back into those vulnerable moments and feel those emotions again and again. She still requires attention from time to time. She needs forgiveness and comforting. I've grown to realise that she may always need that. She needs to be recognised and her experience honoured.
Thanks, Morag.
Thank you. Yeah, and just wanted, just in the context of talking about the healing power of stories, to share a few words. Leslie couldn't be with us herself today, but what she did want to share was this. So I'll just read Leslie's words now, just to finish off here. So Leslie says, I took part in the digital storytelling project with some amount of hesitancy to begin with. Despite being 5 years into remission, my thoughts on my cancer journey were barely straight in my own head. So I had no idea how I would explain them to anyone else. I needn't have worried. Morag and Chris guided me to find my own story, my own voice. I had seen several counsellors since my diagnosis, each one helping in some way. However, what I now realise is that counselling only allows you to work through issues that are consciously laid out along a path towards healing. Should you stray into an area you didn't realise needed to be addressed, it is by chance and not guaranteed to occur consistently, if at all. Something every cancer patient knows is that cancer and the emotional destruction it leaves in its wake doesn't stick to a set curriculum to be neatly unfolded and addressed at a later date. Whilst both endeavours lead to healing, in my opinion, there is a subtle yet empowering difference. You receive counselling, you give your story. By telling my story, I gave myself permission to process what had happened to me. Not only permission, but admission. Admission that I had experienced certain feelings, admission that I hadn't allowed myself or others to provide the support I needed. Telling my story has led not only to relief and healing, but a lasting peace of mind. Issues which previously caused sleepless nights have been thoroughly explored and explained in my own words. My story provided a way not only to process my experience within myself, but also to communicate issues I would not have been brave enough to do in any other way other than storytelling. So that's Leslie's story and her experience of storytelling. And Eleanor, I'll just hand back to you just now. I'll just get the presentation back up. Okay.
Eleanor is just doing that. What we're just going to do over the next wee while, I'm not sure if we're still on track for an hour or so, but we'll just stick to the programme. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we've been doing with storytelling in Macmillan Cancer Support for the last couple of years, and then I'll pass back to Morag to really explore, because Morag's been working much closer. I've been project managing, but Morag's been actually working with the storytellers, so she'll explore a little bit more about what we've been finding, some of those unintended outcomes really in terms of the healing element of it, which Leslie's just explained to you there just now. So why we get into storytelling in the first place was because we as engagement professionals, it's our role to work with people affected by cancer to understand their experience and to help our organisation therefore understand those deeper nuances and the insights that we can gather from people's experience so that we can deliver good cancer care and support and also advocate for good cancer care and support across in the health service. We turned to storytelling because basically a friend in the Scottish Government had told me about it. She had been using digital storytelling in committee to really present stories of female genital mutilation, really difficult topics, and she said, Eleanor, you'll love this, and I absolutely do. But we were really looking for a much more authentic way of working with people and really getting underneath what I'd learned when I joined Macmillan Cancer Support was there's this almost like a journey. They call it the cancer journey, and it's a very kind of formulaic, and more people we talk to, it was like, it always started, I was diagnosed in, and then it would go on to tell you about treatment, to tell you about post-treatment. And I really wanted to get underneath all of that because I thought there must be more underneath all of that. So the digital storytelling, I think, gave us a really authentic, I wanted people to have the power over their own story. I didn't want somebody else telling their story for them. And I really wanted that to be, a powerful and empowering process for the people that we're working with. So cancer is a very complex area, as many of you will know. It touches many people's lives. 1 in 2 of us will experience cancer in the UK. And we really wanted to try help people unpick the complexities that they were experiencing, and also to unpick them for us as an organisation so that we authentically understood the complexities that people were trying to work through. So that reauthoring of people's lived experience was really important for us, and that authenticity. So contextualise our project within what we called was what matters to you. So you'll see in the front slide there, we called it the What Matters to You Digital Storytelling Project, because it was about elevating people's lived experience. So part of our job is elevating people's voice, amplifying voice within our organisation and externally. It started in Scotland, as I said, we have a partner called the Scottish Book Trust, and they were working in communities and really community-based projects all over Scotland with this methodology, and it was all based on the Story Centres model. So we were really interested to honour that process because they had that experience. So we have this partnership with the Scottish Book Trust, and we hit COVID immediately. So I recruited Morag into the project, and we were so keen to get going, and Morag was hardly in the door when we had to then put everything online. So again, we turned to the Story Centre and we video, and we were absolutely delighted. And it's brought advantages because we were then able to work across Scotland and Northern Ireland. We were able to reach out to other parts of the UK, and now we have a huge building library of stories from right across many different communities. We're delighted with. So we've got about 70 odd stories, probably about 100 the next month or so. We'll have about 100 stories online, and they're all on YouTube. So we've done all of the consents around that. But what's been important for us is to put what matters to you at the absolute heart of the process. So no matter, we wanted to, as I said, get away from that journey. It's like we wanted to honour that experience. We didn't want to, deny people had those experiences, but we wanted to start to unpick, well, that was happening, but what was happening in here and in here for you? during that process. So really trying to centre people, and that's what's brought out a lot of the unintended outcomes that we didn't expect. Thanks, Morag. We had set these outcomes for the project, with obviously advocacy outcomes. We wanted to hit the stories and the messages within them to create change in cancer care. And we found that people are really, really willing to get involved in that. We have organisational outcomes, of course, and that was about bringing those insights and that understanding. And as Tony's just spoke about, the listening, we want to become a listening organisation. We're directors who want to be a learning organisation. To be a learning organisation, first of all, you need to be a listening organisation. So we're really trying to advocate internally about how we can bring those voices into the organisation. And then we did anticipate there would be wellbeing outcomes, but not along the healing and the therapeutic elements of it. And what's been beautiful that's come out of that is the sense of community that people have felt, and that peer-to-peer support that people have felt from being involved. Thanks, Morag. So there was three key areas where it's the project has been really making a difference. So that ability to really connect with others. So you would imagine we work 7 weeks, 2 hours a week, and one-to-ones with people, which Morag does all of that, not me. And that really has allowed people to connect not only with their own stories but also with each other's stories, and the empathy that has brought forward and the support that's brought forward for each other has been tremendous. And there is also a massive amount of testimony when we analyse the stories about how much advocacy, how much person-centredness there is there. So we can learn loads from the stories. We're just about to start doing a wee bit more analysis on the stories. At the minute, we've just been really for 2 years gathering stories, and we've been busy doing that. So the next part of the project will be actually about really digging deep into the stories and analysing what they're telling us. We're going to use a process called it's gone. Sorry.
Significant difference, is it?
Significant. Most significant change.
Yeah.
Process. So it's about storytelling. I see Tony nodding. But what we're trying to do there is really learn and pull the themes out from the stories. At the moment, we've got themes around where the stories are kind of landing, but actually not diving into the stories, and that's going to be the next process and the priorities we move forward. So we're trying to embed those stories within we have an awful lot of work with, as you can imagine, cancer nurses. So how do we embed and have that advocacy built into the training that we do for our professional staff. And then, of course, there's the therapeutic value, which we're touching on today, which is not something that we set out to achieve, and it's not something that we set out to really do, but we really see a huge value in actually offering digital storytelling to people as a therapeutic tool. And I'll just pass over to yourself, Morag, to talk.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Eleanor. And I think just as Eleanor said, this didn't start as a therapeutic offering to people affected by cancer. It was about the stories and about really placing people at the heart of this experience and understanding and listening, but helping us to understand and centre our practice as an organisation. It just feels very much as a facilitator that something transformational happens along the way in terms of just the therapeutic value and how people feel, which is so important and has become such a kind of a cornerstone of the work that we do in storytelling. And so when we think about the therapeutic value, we really like this this form of words around that healing therapeutic creative art form, which we're sharing on the screen. Also, there was another reflection from a recent former Chief Medical Officer for Scotland in 2019, and they talked about this is the magic of the arts, the ability to tell stories that connect people of all backgrounds, the skill of exploring complex specialist subjects so that we can understand, reflect, and often laugh or cry at the same time. It's going to have a far greater impact than a leaflet in a GP surgery, a public health document, or a statement from a chief medical officer. And I couldn't agree more in terms of just how it's drawn together and what we see as we run workshops. And we always go back to this unpacking and repacking, I think, of an experience. It was a comment that was made to me a number of years ago on another therapeutic listening project I worked on called Emotional Touch Points, and it was the sense of the unpacking of the that suitcase. And it's a really interesting one. When we then share this comment with storytellers, there's lots of nodding heads as we go through that. And through this 7-week process, we begin that unpacking and repacking, and something else happens if we kind of stick with our suitcase. It appears, from what we hear from people, to get easier to carry the suitcase as well. So what we're finding is that healing is happening, and much more than that, there's this kind of reconnection with self that happens through this process. And it's interesting because people come onto the workshops for lots of different reasons. People come on because they're interested in creativity. People come on to seek connections. A lot of people come on because they don't want their experience lost to make a difference. But what struck me, and what continues to strike me as I work on this, is that in a world where we imagine there are spaces to talk in this way, they don't seem to be as obvious as it may appear to us as well. So I think the sense of actually creating the space to enable this to happen is a really powerful offering that we can share with people. And I think the time to create that space and to connect and just commit to that, both as facilitators and as those, in our ongoing circle, it's really important, and it does actually make a really significant difference to people, we believe. And so when we think about well-being outcomes, there are so many that we hear about in the evaluation that we've done. And as always, I go back to the storytellers to give us insight into what well-being outcomes can look like. And I wanted to introduce you to Georgina, and importantly, her son George is with her in this image as well. And Georgina lives in London and was diagnosed in 2019 with breast cancer. And Georgina came to us to share a story which is called Perspective, and we won't be sharing the story, but we just wanted to share a little bit about what storytelling had meant for Georgina in relation to her well-being. And she based her story around a photograph of herself and her son. And she talked about her story just being about when cancer has its hold, our strength is drawn from the smallest of gestures by the people who love us most. And is based around that photo of herself and George. And her story touched on her own emotions, her isolation while in treatment, and also just the pain of losing friendships and behaviours of those around her as well. And so let me just share some of Georgina's words about her healing within storytelling. So here's Georgina. To say I had a mess of a head when my cancer treatment finished is quite the understatement. I knew things were wrong, and I knew I had to address some issues, but I couldn't articulate what those issues were, let alone how I could address them. I needed to come to some sort of peace within myself following the shock of having had cancer, but I just didn't know how. When I discovered digital storytelling in the project, I thought it would be a nice creative outlet to enhance my storytelling skills. What I didn't realise was that the process would help me pick apart and get to the bottom of what my story actually was. It allowed me to hear and understand what my own head had been trying to scream at me for so long. A couple of years on now, and I still feel the benefit of the experience. I hold it as if not the, key turning point of when I started to pick myself up and dust myself off from the colossal ordeal of cancer and what it had just taken me through. For that, I'll be forever grateful to Macmillan. And it was interesting talking to Georgina, because she talked about the creative carrot that we dangled there in relation to actually, she reflected she wouldn't have gone to a support group. It wasn't that, it was the creativity that drew her. But what she got from that was so much more than she expected. She didn't plan to share her story with anybody. This was just for her. This was just for her to help her understand as well. But she chose to share her story ultimately because she felt through sharing her story that she could make a difference, and that she felt confident to share her story, where before it was all internal. Another thing she shared with us, she talked about, I was so angry, that's gone now. I can understand more. When I shared it, something changed. I didn't expect to get back what I did from the people I shared it with. People have reached out. I understand more, and I've been able to help others. So I think with sharing a little bit about Georgina's experience, I hope it gives you a sense of some of the wellbeing outcomes experienced. That's Georgina's story, but there are many other stories like that, where we hear from storytellers just about the impact of actually creating a story, but just how they feel inside. Fairly recently, we've just finished a workshop around cancer, sex and intimacy with women from across the United Kingdom, and interestingly, very, very similar experiences throughout the country around stigma and silence. And again, people have started the workshop thinking, this is for me, but by the end, feeling reduced feelings of shame around the particular cancers that they're going through, and actually feeling that they can make a difference and turning that negative into positive is really shifting. It's really shifting things in their life as well. So we are convinced of the numerous wellbeing outcomes that we see really visibly when we're talking and understanding storytellers' experiences on the workshops as well. And storytellers are getting involved, they're getting much more involved with beyond the actual story they tell as well. They're supporting, they're co-producing events with us, they're talking about their stories, and they're wanting to tell more stories. So that in itself, we really sense that there is this shift going on as we work through storytelling with people. And Eleanor touched on the sense of community, and one of our hopes was to bring connection and belonging to a community. As I said at the top of my bit, we have people coming to the workshops who have never really spoken out loud about their experience, but the sense that they're feeling that community, and they're building trust. And the COVID gave us the gift of a longer time with people on workshops, and I don't think we can underestimate the investment of that time in building trust and connection and enabling people to feel empowered and less isolated when they come to share their stories as well. And I think, again, as Eleanor alluded to earlier, there is so much of this about the listening and about understanding and about connecting as we go through these workshops as well. And what we find is we have workshops and we create stories, but beyond that, we're able to share these stories on a much, much bigger online community that Macmillan hosts, with around 72,000 people with cancer. And imagine if these stories can just touch even some of these people, what the difference it makes. And for the storytellers, it's honouring their hopes for their story as well. And as Eleanor alluded, also we've got a library of stories, and we continue to come together with our storytellers network monthly to share more stories, to keep creating community as we go through the project. And just finally from me, just thinking about one of the other key area of that we see within the storytelling is peer-to-peer support. There are overwhelming connections that we see occurring. We see it, we feel it as facilitators as well. And as one storyteller said very early on in our workshops, people who just get it matter. Just coming into that space and just breathing and understanding that everybody's experience is different, but there's a shared connection there as well, and it's a privilege as a facilitator to feel that connection between storytellers as they listen, they share experience and also share purpose as well. And I love the kind of the quote that we have here about the almost a journey through connection to just empowerment, and actually we can maybe do something with our stories as well, and it's a really kind of powerful experience to be part of. And just to finish, I wanted to share about a group of our storytellers. So we have small groups, and we had a group on a Wednesday evening who called themselves the Wednesday Warriors, and they themselves named themselves. They hadn't met before, they had very different care experiences, very different women, very different lives, and they explored together, and they shared their vulnerabilities, they found their strengths, and we saw this unfolding in the group, and we could see how they felt their value, and questions were asked and solutions were offered just through connection and through story sharing as well. And to this day, that group continues. They set themselves up separate from our work, just to keep that support going. So there's many instances, I think, of peer-to-peer support that we see, and it just underpins all of the work that we're doing in the workshops. And I think a combination of all of these elements really lead to that very sort of therapeutic, healing, supportive process of storytelling. So I'm just going to hand back to Eleanor now, who will just take the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Morag. And just after this, we'll just hand it over to yourself for some Q&A and some thoughts and some conversation, really. But just one reflection from, again, what Morag always says, and again, when Tony was speaking, it made me think about what Morag says. She says we hold the space. And that's what, when Tony was talking about that silence, and it just made me think, when you say you just holding the space for people, and that is really, really a valuable and valued thing. So that's where we are at the moment. We have huge ambitions, and not least of them is to actually get out with the stories now, and maybe stop out a bit more of the collection and more of the what are we doing with all of these stories. We've tapped into colleagues such as Pip and Tony to learn from others, and we're really hoping to learn from yourselves today as practitioners about, well, what do we do with all of this? We do have ambitions, and we really want to get out to, I suppose there's three kind of, I suppose, themes, three ways that the stories, I think, are manifesting themselves. So there's stories that are absolutely about peer-to-peer support. So we want to be able to connect people affected by cancer with other people affected by cancer, with the story and the storyteller at the heart of those, so that people absolutely get something from listening to other people's stories, and they find themselves and they find their own experience in other people's experience. And that means a lot to people, because, as Morag says, very often they don't ever speak about these things. I mean, think about carers and people caring for people, then again, these are sometimes very unspoken things. And we really want to be able to say, that's okay. You maybe never ever have to speak them. Someone else has spoken it for you. But as long as you can find comfort in knowing that you're not alone in that experience and that thought, then we know that helps. There's also the advocacy stories, which are, hopefully around personalised care and how do we get out there and advocate for better cancer care and support. And then there's also the therapeutic element as well. So we find that there's stories for different audiences. And I think we've learned along the way that if you show the wrong story to the wrong audience, it just kind of lands pretty badly at times. So we've learned that as we've moved along. It's that actually thinking, who is this story for? Who was it for? And where will it land best? And what's it actually doing, by that, through that connection? But I think, thinking about all that, we want to get out to communities. We want to, start taking our stories on the road, as it were, and have community events. And it started making me think about how do we frame all of that, and this is a theme that comes up an awful lot. Is this how do we make this invisible stuff that's in here, that story that people think they're coming to tell, but actually that's not the story that they end up telling. And anybody that's been involved in this work will know when you walk it, and I've done it myself. When I was going through I went, oh, well, I'll just tell a story about a wee holiday I went on with some guys I used to hang about when I used to go sea kayaking, and that'll be my wee story. And actually it turned into a story about being a woman in a man's world, and I felt disempowered, and it all came out of, like, you don't know where it comes from, but all of a sudden you're in tears and you think, I don't know, but I can see Pip and Tony nodding, because that is the process, and that's how we surface this through this process. It does work. So it started making me think a lot about when people talk about their cancer experience, somebody did this beautiful piece of creative writing in Northern Ireland we were working with, and she started having this, it was just a poem, and she said, well, the consultant said this, and I said that, but inside here, something else was going on. And it really, really was powerful. And I thought, so there's this, and people talk about this masking, you know, Leslie's stories about this front that people put on for their families, for their professionals, for, you know, for the world out there. There's this going on out here, and even with professionals, they're having a conversation and a dialogue which just hits this mask the whole time. And I thought, how do you get beyond the mask? That's where the gold is. That's where the real conversation happens. And I suppose it's that question I wanted to bring to yourselves as practitioners, as people who want to share and maybe have experienced yourself. And I suppose we wanted to kind of invite yourselves to think about how can we, either in our own practice, you know, by maybe sharing your own practice, surface and help people to unsurface that invisible stuff, or how do we get out there with our stories and in turn, you know, share that invisible stuff that we know is needing to be heard in you know, open conversation. So I suppose we just wanted to invite yourselves to think about that. How do we turn that invisible? How do we make that invisible visible? And that's kind of a question that we're toying with at the moment. So we would welcome any thoughts if you would like to share them, or we would welcome any questions that you've got for us for the rest of the session.
Okay, thank you very much, and Morag.
Online.
Oh, a few questions, yes. Rebecca.
So, Georgia, if you want to relay some of the questions from online, and we can do both at the same time if people can multitask and do both the task and listen to the answer, because we'll be short of time.
Yes, we were going to do the task, we're not doing the task. Morag says, don't do the task, and you make it too complicated. Okay. So the task is about, but we do still want to tap into the wisdom of people in the room. So, but happy to take questions. Yeah.
Did you want to invite your question first, or
no? Just go.
Just make sure that people online can hear me.
Thank
so
you.
We had a great question from Mark, which is, how important is it to work in a group rather than individually with storytellers?
I would say we've done both, and I'll pass that over to Morag. She's done most of the practical stuff, but we've absolutely done both, and there's been benefit in both. Yeah. Morag?
Yeah, I think there is there's real power in the group dynamic and the group setting, because I think I sort of alluded there's so much involved in the listening and the peer support as well. So I think, you know, the bulk of the storytelling has been in group sessions. However, for some people, group settings have not necessarily been the setting that they feel comfortable in. And what we wanted to do at the core of this was kind of people, and just to create just as flexible an opportunity and to tell your story, because ultimately people wanted to tell their stories. So I have done some one-to-one sessions with people also, and certainly the reflections from people was incredibly positive from the one-to-one as well. And we also have the gift of an invitation to the more informal story time sessions we run beyond the workshops as well. So that was in the hope that potentially if people did choose to, they could still in some way connect with that kind of that peer, the fellowship of the shared space as well. So we've gone towards groups, but equally with the flexibility for what's best for the individual as well. Yep, I think that's probably where we are with that.
Could you stop sharing the slides, Morag, so we can
sorry, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
I'm trying to blame COVID for everything. It's just
that's it now. Thank you.
So let's turn to the room for I've got a question at the back.
Thank you for the great presentation. I started with the story that you sent to the time period of waiting for that fall, right? And many, not only in cancer but other chronic diseases and other conditions, people wait for that fall or the news. How do you see adding an audience of clinical practitioners to exposing them to these kinds of stories and potentially adding them to their training in communicating diagnosis, especially diagnosis that would be diagnosed.
The question is about bringing in clinical practitioners and including these digital stories in training.
Yep, we can answer that. Yeah. Well, do you want me to answer that one?
I'll give it.
Okay, go for it, Lottie.
Yeah, so we are absolutely, exploring that option. We're going to start with the practitioners, the clinical practitioners that we work with. So we work with oncologists, we work with cancer nurse specialists, and a variety of healthcare professionals, allied healthcare professionals. So we're trying to embed that within the training that we provide as an organisation, which is quite a lot of training. So we're going to start there and get the stories in there. But I think you're absolutely right. We would absolutely welcome any opportunity to embed them. But I think I've shared with Pip and Tony, we actually find quite a lot of resistance, if I'm being honest. A huge amount of resistance from health practitioners to actually listen to the stories. And some of our colleagues have actually said they find them so upsetting that they can't listen to them. So that's why we always put that health warning in front of them, which we just find bizarre. I must admit, we're really struggling with it because you work with people affected with cancer health conditions every day, but why they can't listen to it. So I don't know if it's too emotional or what's going on there, but we are absolutely struggling. It would be my honest answer there. Yes. So did you, Tony, did you want to come in?
Do you think that's because the balance of power has shifted from the clinician in the normal conversation to the storyteller, to the patient?
Absolutely.
And it leaves them deeper in the water than they want to be.
Yeah, and we've reflected on the power dynamic here in these stories. Whose story is getting told? As an organisation, do we decide whose story is getting told, whose story is getting captured? When is the story getting told? So there's always going to be a power dynamic, absolutely there. And we have found huge resistance to actually sharing their stories in the forums that we would love. We thought we would have open arms, didn't we, Morag? We thought they'll be, here we are. They're just going to love them because it's about insight and so much to learn from it. But we're chipping away and we're making progress, so we've not lost faith.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
I just want to say that it's wonderful, just lovely what you're doing. There is a parallel thing going on in the NHS where I'm training frontline practitioners to make digital stories, and we've trained hundreds and hundreds of frontline practitioners. So maybe there's a little bit of joining up needs doing. So we can put you in touch with the NHS practitioners who are embracing digital storytelling in a big way across the UK. So had conversations with people in Scotland but not done any training there yet.
It's just about joining, I think, up some of the passionate people that believe in this process.
A little bit in Wales.
Lovely. Lovely.
So we could,
great. We've got digital champions now across the organisation, and we have one in Wales as well.
Yeah.
We've also Morag's just been working with the.
Was it the professionals you were thinking about, Eleanor?
Yes.
Yes. We kind of joined like that. Yeah, we've just recently done a face-to-face residential workshop with 7 health professionals from Northern Ireland. We went over to Northern Ireland for the weekend, and it was really a really powerful weekend. We'd always it was one of our big hopes, I think, in the project that we could listen to not only people affected by cancer, but also health professionals and really understand. And one of the interesting things, I think, for us and encouraging for us was when we showed people affected by cancer stories throughout the weekend. They wanted more of that, and it was really interesting seeing the different perspectives that they were taking from watching the stories. So I think, and certainly we're just finishing off the stories with the group just now, and they certainly the folks that I've been working with, they've become real advocates for digital storytelling and the space it's created in their minds to reflect on what they do, and their hopes for their story are really aligning to what people affected by cancer's hopes are in relation to change, to time for reflection as well, but also the therapeutic value has come in there as well. So I think it's a rolling stone, isn't it? And I think if we can kind of harness the positivity that people feel and just kind of keep going, and that connection that has been shared from the audience I can't see sounds great. Actually, sounds really positive. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we'll turn to another question online. Christy asked if she was wondering if there is a difference for you or the storytellers in the authenticity of the story, if hitting every important point as realistic is crucial, or if it's sometimes easier to repack the story through a non-realistic medium.
We've explored a little bit of that, haven't we, Morag? Because you've been you did the Story Centre's training with using objects. So, but sometimes that can help, externalize the power of what's probably inside. Would you say that, Morag? We've not used it an awful lot. I mean, normally we have, worked with people and their experience. So, but there's a lot of support around for people in terms of when they do that. But we are exploring that placing an object in the centre of the story and helping people
Exploring around it.
Around that. I think that is that. I couldn't answer what was best or different about them, but it's something certainly that we've been thinking about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Back to the room. Further questions from the room?
Thank you for a very nice presentation. I just wonder if you sometimes feel, I see that, I know that digital storytelling can really heal and help you to sort of deal with all that you have been through. And also, I thought it was interesting when you said to do it in a group, it's better because you don't feel so alone. But as an organization, I was wondering, do you sometimes feel the dilemma of that you get stories that you really would like to use, to show to the public, and that the person don't want it? Is there ethical dilemma sometimes in that?
Summarize. Just for the folks online, the question is around the ethical implications for sharing stories when they've been created, but the storyteller doesn't necessarily want to share them for the organization.
Well, we've got a really robust, we started off, and again we learned from the Story Centre a really robust process of the ethics that we apply to, and that's day one. That's first thing that people go through is we don't ask anybody to share their story until they've created their story. So until the story is finished and they see the story, and then they decide if they're going to share it, and we don't ask them to do that. So they can come in the 7-week process, and never share the story but from themselves, and we don't ever force. About 99% of people choose to share their story, and we've got a really robust information governance and consent form that wraps around all of that. So but I think not doing the asking and the decision making until because we know, as everybody has been spoken about, we know until people get to the end of the story and they decide and they discover the story that they've landed with, because it's maybe not the story that they started off with. So that's why it all happens there, and we would never ask. We're very, very clear never to ask anybody to share that they're not comfortable with. Now the organisation might be uncomfortable with some of the stuff that's shared, and that's another conversation, because they can be very challenging, and some of our colleagues were quite nervous about the whole thing, and have shied away from it because they think they're going to be critical, or what if people are critical about Macmillan, what if people are critical about other organisations? But of course that's not what people are there for, and we again, we're just very honest about that we wouldn't share something that was openly critical of Macmillan, but we would deal with that in another way.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Every storyteller comes before they actually even come on the workshops. They have a taster session, for want of a better word, and it's made entirely clear that there will never be a tussle for sharing stories. It's absolutely they're in control of this process from the start to the finish of it, and we hold that very dear and very close.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll take one more question, Tony.
Have any of the storytellers expressed any concerns about YouTube monetizing their stories?
Question is around if the storytellers have expressed any concerns around YouTube and monetizing their stories.
No, I don't know the answer to that, Morag.
No,
Is it not? Have we got them published in a way that they can't?
they're unlisted and private, so it's just with the URLs. If people have them and they can't be embedded anywhere else. So I don't know, Tony, if that was that Tony that was asking that question.
Yes.
Yeah, if that helps with that one. One of the, I think week 6, we talk a lot about consents and about, you know, where they're hosted and what we can protect and what we can't as well. So I think it's that acknowledgement that we can't, it's not 100%, but we do what we do as much as we can to, you know, to hold their stories and keep their stories safe. And at any time they can withdraw consent as well.